shortly after that and replacing them with dummy eggs. And so we go into the field, shortly after the eggs are laid, the adults are jumping up and screaming at us and all that. And we go in, take their eggs out, put one of these in there, and leave as quickly as we can. And the eagles come back. As far as they're concerned, they just kicked our rears. You know, they drove us away. They come back. You know, they're all pumped up, and they sit down and they incubate these dummy eggs that are in there. And people have said, like, well, you know, why don't they know that these things aren't real eggs? And the thing is, they've never really evolved any need to have to be. I mean, they've never been tricked before, so there's no need to be able to figure it out. And so it's one of these things. If it's round and it's white, they're going to put a rock in there. They would probably sit on it. Then we put them into these little incubators we have, and we were transporting the eggs to initially the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group, and then the San Francisco Zoo for incubation. Now, when we looked at some of the concentrations and the eggs that we were getting, because of course most of these eggs would not hatch in captivity, and we were able to do the analysis. We were comparing them to what was occurring in the Great Lakes, which was really a big area that was affected by PCBs and DDE at one time, and then also along the Columbia River. And so we saw these concentrations of, and they measured them in parts per million in the eggs. It was 2.8 and 9.7. Now, 3 to 5 ppm, you end up getting some eggshell thinning starts. And if you get up to 15 ppm, then basically nothing's going to hatch. You just forget it. So we had the eggs from Catalina analyzed. It was not really good news. So we knew we had some problems to deal with here. So looking at these eggs that we took out of the nest, we were seeing all these little patches on there, and you're not supposed to be able to see it. It's supposed to be uniform. Now this one's not a direct comparison because the embryo in this is really big, and so the light isn't shining through very well. But I can just tell you, the egg is supposed to basically all look like uniform color, not have these patches all over it. So what was happening is that the DDE doesn't just thin the shells, it also affects the shell structure, and that allows moisture to be lost and the death of the embryo. Now we were trying to figure out which females might be more polluted than others, and in one case they made it a little bit tough on us because we ended up having 2 females deciding they were going to occupy the same nest at the west end of Catalina. Now the male was all about this. He was like, this was awesome. The females spent a lot of time bickering, deciding who was going to get to incubate, who was going to feed the chicks that were in there, and we fostered chicks in and all that. But this particular time, they both laid eggs. They had 2 cups in the nest. They don't ever lay 4 eggs that we know of, so we assume one of the females laid 3 and another one put 1 in there and 1 over here. We could never tell who was responsible for what with these guys. So. And then about 2005, we decided to actually move the incubation stuff to Catalina Island itself, rather than transporting the eggs all the time up to the zoo, because we just weren't sure how tough that was on the embryos too. They're just starting to develop, and you don't want to be shaking them up a lot. So we set up our own facility, and this was a real state-of-the-art operation. We had a microscope with a camera in it, so we could look at the shells very closely, see where the weak spots were that we could detect, and then we used a substance called tegaderm, and they use this on human burn victims where they want to make sure that there's still oxygen exchange, but that it reduces the amount of water loss. And so that's what we wanted to do, because they still breathe through the eggshell, and so we wanted to, if you completely coat it, they're just going to die. So we have to go in and put this stuff slowly over these different areas and then take it off as they get bigger and they're going to have greater demands for oxygen. You start pulling some of the tegaderm back off. You're weighing the eggs every day to make sure that they're losing the right amount of water, and if they aren't, you put more of it on. And it's just one of those things that it just takes a tremendous amount of time. And we used a new type of incubator called a contact incubator that actually sort of duplicates what a female bird might do, and that is that rather than a forced air one where it's warm all the way around the eggs all the time, this is heated just here So when you lower it, it just sets over the tops of the eggs on the top, and then occasionally deflates. The eggs are rolled, and then inflates again. And so we ended up having much better hatching success using those. And here shows a whole collection of eggs we had in there. And we, with all of this effort, ended up having a little better success. We started seeing, getting the eggs pipping out. First year we weren't exactly sure what we were doing. They pipped out, and a day went by, and nothing was happening. It's like, we got to save this thing. And we're like trying to get it out of there, and this and that. Later we find out, no, after they pip, it takes about 48 hours before they actually decide they want to go through. And then in a matter of hours, they just rotate around and poke a hole so the whole cap just pops off, and the chick comes out. And here we have a little one-day-old bird and a brooder here, just getting all warm and fuzzy. And one getting his little meal. This is ground up quail that were put in there for him. And this is stuff that just, talk about, these guys are just tiny, and they want to eat all the time, and basically you never sleep. And you're in there, they're peeping, they're too cold, too hot, hungry, constipated. It's like you just don't know what the heck's going on. But one of my employees, and I wish I could stop them from doing this, we were just like, you're up for hours and hours and hours and hours, because you got some that are hatching out, others that are already hatched. And I had one chick in an incubator that was just peeping and peeping, and I would reach in and set my hand on it, and it would quiet down. And I'm like, okay, good. And take my hand off and go close the incubator. Peep, peep, peep. Stick my hand up, quiet down, And I'm like, did this a few times, and I was like, oh. Grab the chick, set it on my chest on the chair, and leaned back, and I fell asleep. And got a picture of me sitting there with my mouth open, and sitting on my lap. But here's some of the clan that are being raised up. Now, because we couldn't always hatch out all the eggs to get back to the adults, we also had the San Francisco Zoo set up a captive breeding colony of bald eagles. And when they finally had those birds breeding, they produced and hatched out eggs that we could then take those chicks and foster them into nests on the island when we were not able to successfully hatch out the more contaminated eggs. Make a giant puppet, eagle puppet, that we would use to feed the birds, especially in the few feedings before we were going to foster them into a nest, just so they get used to this gigantic yellow thing coming down over them and not be frightened by that in any way. And then getting them back into the nest is a little more complicated sometimes than might seem. Because one of the problems with taking the eggs out and in and putting the chicks in is if you take too long to do it, if you disturb the birds too long, they just abandon. They just go, okay, this is too weird, I'm out of here. And because they're long-lived birds, they say, I can breed again next year. And so we have to get in and out fast. And in cases where we're on nasty cliffs where we know we're going to be there for 3.5 hours trying to get up that thing and get into a nest and all that to do it, we came up with a technique that had never been done before. And that is that here's Dave in a flight suit and his little package with an eagle chick here. And my friends refer to this as dope on a rope. But it actually was very effective. You can get into the nest, the helicopter pilot, hopefully not bouncing you off the cliff too many times, would get you down, set you in the nest, you grab the dummy eggs, you put the chick in, pull away, and again, the adults are flying around and screaming. As far as they're concerned, they just kicked you off. But the interesting thing is now, they come back and there's a chick in the nest. There wasn't a chick when I left. There's a chick there now. And the first time around, it's little tentative on what's going to happen, because they've never seen a chick before. And so if they have the real egg in there, what happens is that whole process of them pipping, and they're hearing the chick making noises, it's talking to them, even before they pip, it's making noises, and then it pips out. So they've got 2, 3, 4, 5 days to kind of like, oh yeah, I think I know what's going on here. Well, unfortunately, our eggs weren't doing that. So we were a little nervous about it. So one of the things we thought about doing, and we did, is take a goose egg and open it up, clean it out, and just put the shell in there, hoping that the adults would come back and go, egg, chick, egg, oh, okay, yeah, I got it. And for the most part, it did work. Sometimes it took them several hours before they would decide that this was something worth coming in and taking care of. But we were a couple of little youngsters we put into one nest, returned into the parents. And the parents, especially after the first time, it is just, I mean, it's easy. They immediately start taking care of the chick when you put it in there. They just can't figure out how come every time somebody comes to this nest is the exact time the egg hatches. They just never figured that one out. But they're very, very good. I remember one day at this particular nest, I put a chick in, and the adult was flying around. Before we even got 50 feet away from that nest, the adult was already back on it again, looking at the chick, looking at us, and we're just scurrying away, you know. And the chick was asleep in the nest, and she was just kind of, you know, hunkered down next to it, looking at it and this and that. And the chick we could see it lift up its head and just assumed it made a little noise, a peep or something like that. She looked at it, she looked over off the edge, dove off, came back 60 seconds later with a Xantu's murrelet. Still kicking. And so you begin to think that these guys it's just like food on demand. Hungry? I'll be back in a second. Off and got something and came back. So they are really, really good parents. And then when the chicks reach the same age as the ones I talked about taking out of the wild, and they reach that 7 or 8 week age period, when they reach 7 or 8 weeks of age, we go in and we band them, put transmitters on them so we could figure out how, you know, if they were surviving, and wing tags. You can see the adults coming in and defending the nest. And about 17 years into the project, the Institute was growing, and I was starting to get involved in a lot of other projects too. It was getting tougher and tougher for me to come down and kind of take care of everything that was going on in Catalina. And that's when I started looking for a new person to take the reins. And I ended up hiring Peter Sharp, who was just finishing up at Colorado State University with his PhD. And it was really a hard thing to do. I mean, this is a project that I'd spent a good part of my adult life working on and getting going and turning over the reins. You know, it's like handing your car keys to your teenage kid the first time and like, okay, here you go. And they said, okay, you're not letting go of the keys. I know, but here you go. And Pete was really good about it. You know, he was really good at asking questions, but he took over the reins and has really excelled and let this program grow, and I've never looked back. It was just a great choice, and he's done a great job with it. He also set up a program, expanded up to the northern Channel Islands on Santa Cruz Island, and our idea at the time was we were still having a problem with hatching at that point, but we thought, well, maybe if we get a site that's further away from that sewage outfall area I was showing you on the map, maybe the concentrations would be lower and the birds would be able to breed. So we started a program up there as well, and released 60 birds on Santa Cruz Island, hoping that they would occupy the northern Channel Islands. And in 2006, we had our first chick ever hatch out on the Channel Islands. This was on Santa Cruz Island, and it was kind of an amazing thing. This is like the first time in almost 50 years that bald eagles had hatched a chick on the islands. And the following year, on Santa Catalina Island, the eggs had been hatching out so well for us in our captive incubation facility. We said, well, we're not really doing very much to these things. Let's just leave some of these better ones in the nest. And we did that to 2 different nests, and both of them hatched and fledged their young. But this was 28 years for me. That was a long, long time to wait. And but you know, you forget about all that when you look down. And I'm sorry, these pictures were taken out of spotting scopes, but you know, they aren't very clear. But when you see those, all of a sudden someone calls in and says, "Yeah, I see a chick in the nest. They're feeding it." And you're going like, "Oh my God!" I couldn't believe it. And so Since then, things have taken off and done much better. On Catalina, we've got several different territories now that are producing chicks every year, and we get new territories periodically. On the northern Channel Islands, we've also got pairs that have established and successfully produced chicks. And so overall, the project has really taken off. We have about 17 breeding pairs out on the islands now. We have them on 4 different islands, possibly 5, and we're producing 10 to 20 eaglets a year, which is enough for the birds to replace themselves. So what are sort of the lessons learned or conclusions that I come from my project in this long journey? Sometimes things don't go as planned. Well, okay, that's kind of to be expected, I guess, but and also prepare for the worst, because it's probably the way it's going to go anyway. And I brought this forward to all my projects after that. We're like, yeah, no, I don't expect to succeed. And then, you're happy when you do. And the wildlife populations really have an inherent ability to make it. If you give them any opportunity, if you remove those pressures that have kept them down or caused problems, they can be very resilient and come back. And persistence, well, annoying to some people, does pay off in the long run, and it's a virtue, and you should really stick with it. And finally, I think probably the most important thing is that quality is good. Thank you very much.
Just wondering if you, I'll start. I'm just wondering if you made an effort to put chicks back into the same nests that they had been taken back.
We did. It wasn't one of those things that we thought was the most important thing. Sometimes it was a timing thing. If we had one that had actually had been sitting on the artificial eggs longer, before, while we're waiting for a chick, it's one of those things where you just don't know how long you can push it sometimes. It's 33 days is the average time. When we start hitting 45 days, we're like, oh, how much longer are they going to sit on these things? And sometimes we thought it was more important to give them somebody else's chick just to keep them on the nest. Yes?
Is there any difference from the young that you raised yourself and didn't have the adults to help, teach them what they knew, the wild adults?
Well, the ones that we raised and released on the platforms,
Yeah.
those are the ones that ended up producing these chicks. So,
But did if you looked at the wild ones compared to the ones that you caught, was there a difference in the timeline between the wild ones that learned to fly and eat as compared to the ones that you raised learning to fly and eat? Was there a shorter time span because they had the adults to?
no, I don't think so, because the adults don't basically teach them
They don't.
very
Okay.
much. They just take care of them there
Okay.
while the kids are trying to figure it out. And that may be that the kids can watch them go down and catch a fish, but that doesn't mean that they can. That's it's still gonna take them a year for them to figure out how to do that. So I don't think there was any loss by not having the adults.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, David, in 1991, you hacked some birds from Plymouth National Forest. Do you know what the fate was on those birds? This was the lake that they were going to rope on.
Oh, yeah, right. In that particular situation, it was, the eagles were on eggs, and they were going to come in and rope on the lake, which was going to destroy all the fish. And so they knew that these adults wouldn't make it. So we had to go and we took the eggs out of the nest, I think. And so those eggs we brought down, and we fostered those into wild nests, and they hatched those eggs out. Now, I don't remember what happened. There's too many birds for me to remember what happened to those particular birds, but yes.
So now that they have all these eagles, they have territory now on the islands. When their populations expand so broadly and there's not enough territory left on the islands, do they go elsewhere up to the mainland or what?
Yeah, in fact, we have some adult birds that are nesting on the mainland that came from Catalina or came from the Northern Islands.
Yeah, okay.
And so, yeah, sometimes they just leave and decide, you know, so the natal area is really, doesn't necessarily mean the island there. That's more of like a 200-mile thing. So they're more likely to nest in the general region of where they were patched out. But if there's territories available, and, I mean, good quality territories available, they're probably more likely to nest in the closer to where they were patched out. Yes, sir.
The wing tags you have on there, how do you attach them and how do you keep them from falling off?
They're wrapped around the wing, and then we use basically a sheep ear tag. It passes through the sort of the fleshy part. It's just skin basically on the patagium. It punches through there, and that holds it in, and doesn't seem to bother the birds. Yes, sir.
Two-part question. What's the average lifespan of a bald eagle? And second half of the question is that water where the dump site was being tested to see if there's any residual?
Good questions. The first one is a little harder for me. We have had birds, some of our birds on the island are in their mid-20s. And so they can certainly live a long time. The reason why that's kind of hard to answer is that you have to have a marked bird in order to be able to determine that, and you don't get a lot of returns. Even birds that they go out and banding and all that, it's not, you just don't collect a whole lot of data like that. And I haven't looked into it recently to see if there's better information on how long they live. But they don't start breeding until they're like 4, 5, 6 years old, and so it doesn't surprise me at all that they live into their 20s. The second part of the question is actually pretty interesting because of just something that came up just recently. The EPA, there was a big settlement. And I didn't want to get involved in the whole court case that I was involved with on this whole thing, but Montrose, basically, they got sued for this dumping, and I was in court for 10 years on that. And finally, there was a big settlement, and part of the settlement was that the EPA was going to use some of this money to cap that. They were going to go try to get clean fill, dump it over the top of it, and kind of seal it in down there the best they could. So they were experimenting with this, and it wasn't working very well. And just recently, I read in the LA Times that they had come in and they went back down to do some sampling, and they can't find any. So they were like, well, that's not possible. It's got to be, there was tons of it here. You know, so now they're going back and sampling again to make sure they hadn't made a mistake. So it's either some sampling error or a really pretty cool mystery, where after a period of time, it could be that this stuff all of a sudden just reaches this tipping point where it loses chlorines off of it and becomes inert. I'd love that to be the answer, but we'll wait and see what they find on their next
Do you know what the fine was?
I'm sorry?
Do you know how much the fine was?
It was about, well, there was cash, I think was in the $30 million range, and then there was other things too.
Yeah, that's not much.
No. But second to the Exxon Valdez.
Yeah.
Yeah, one here first.
Of the fledglings that you're following and that you can track, how large a distance do they go? How far away from where they hatched have they gone?
The question is how far do the fledglings go, and we actually put satellite transmitters on some of the birds that allow us to, basically they have GPS units on them, and it uploads the information through a satellite, and we've tracked them all the way up into Canada. It's not uncommon for them to go into Oregon and Washington, but we haven't had them go up into Canada as well, and then also over to Montana. And so they get a wild hair and just take off, you know, and it's pretty amazing how far they'll go. And some stay on the island, and other ones depart. Yeah.
When you initially went up and gathered the adult birds and put them in the crates and got them and took them to the islands, how long did that process take?
Well, it varied a little bit. I mean, it's usually, probably a week. So you go up, you do your flights, figure out where the nests are, then you would go out and visit those nests. Sometimes you could do 2 or 3 in a day, and other times you could only do 1 in a day because of where it was located.
And then you would just ship?
No, we keep all the birds all the birds together, and we would just take care of them, you know, feed them daily. And then once we had them all, it was just too complicated to try to ship, you know, partial shipments down, and they're just sitting in the carrier going like, okay. Yes.
How widespread is the population across North America now?
Well, they breed from Alaska down to the northern part of Mexico, and they're breeding on that through BC, Yukon, Washington, Oregon, California, and they breed in across the south, extensively in Florida, on up the east coast into Canada. They're pretty widespread. Yes.
When you initially collected the Sequoia gold chicks, how many of them did you collect?
How many chicks did we collect? Well, it depended on the year. I mean, some years we went, initially when we started, we just got 6 per year. We had 3 platforms and we put 2 per platform. When I showed that picture of us building the bigger platform on the Northern Channel Islands, we could put 2 boxes on that and put 3 in each one. And so we went up and collected 12 chicks at a time. That was really fun. Back.
Do you have any volunteer projects?
We don't have too many volunteer projects just because of the nature of where our work is and everything like that. But I mean, you can we always post the stuff on our website, which is iws.org. So you can look there if you want to see. Yeah.
Do you do both the wing tags and banding, or one or the other? What's the difference in the two?
We do both. We both wing tag and band, primarily because the bands are probably going to always be there. I mean, they don't really deteriorate over time, you know, where you wouldn't be able to read the number on them. But you can't read the number unless you have them in hand. So you either have to capture them or you find them dead. But the wing tags allow us to be able to see that all these birds are still around, identify who's who they end up breeding with, whether they went to another island. And you know, I know some people don't like the bling that we put on the birds, but it's really been informative to us to be able to find out how this population is doing.